Have you ever heard an intercessor speak to the Lord or about the Lord? And it makes you go like, I'd never talk to the Lord like that. For example, if the intercessor says, Lord, I know you said you're going to do this. It's like, why haven't you done it? If this thing is too difficult for you, then it's like, just forget about it, and I'll forget about it too, and I'll even keep quiet about it. And then on and on. And again, you're like, I'd never talk to the Lord like that. Plus, if you're telling the Lord that if this thing is too difficult for him, Paul wrote that anything that's not of faith is sin. So among the multiple ways the Lord can say you're sinning is that you're sinning because you're demonstrating a lack of faith that God can't do what he says he's going to do. But could it also be sinful if you will not challenge the Lord like that? I remember many years ago, the Lord had me write a book called Birth Pangs, the Prophetic Intercessor. And he had me write things to include how important intercession is in the ministry of a prophet. And with intercession comes relationship. I know I've mentioned recently that I get an abundance of revelation based on time spent in the scriptures, time spent in prayer, and yes, there's even times where because of enemy attacks. Because there are times when the enemy tries things, and the Lord will show me the opposite. Because the enemy, by nature, his character, is a liar. And even the way, like a person who is an intercessor, will approach things regarding the enemy, it may sound a little bit different. So yes, it may seem, and depending on the circumstances, even potentially blasphemous, to say, Lord, if this is too difficult for you, then don't bother. You can forget about it, and I will also. We're going to take a look at some examples of how people handled issues with the Lord. The first of which is Eli. In 1 Samuel 2, he had made his sons judges over Israel, Hophni and Phinehas, but they weren't doing too well. They were doing things to include, rather than when the meat that people were cooking would be where a portion would be given to the priests, where they would dip a fork into the boiling pot, cauldron, or whatsoever, kettle, or whatsoever else they're cooking in, and whatsoever came up would be considered the Lord's portion to the priest. Oh no, their sons would have people and be like, now give us, they want to pick out the portions that they wanted. Then there's things like sleeping with a woman. Big no-no. And yes, Eli chastised his sons, but it still continued. And then lo and behold, in 1 Samuel 2, the Lord sent a prophet to proclaim judgment upon Eli and the house of Eli. But then in 1 Samuel 3, a young Samuel was ministering unto the Lord under the tutelage of Eli. The Lord called Samuel. And yes, Eli played a part in letting Samuel know it was the Lord who was calling him. And when Samuel answered the Lord's call, oh boy. I'll pick on 1 Samuel 3, verses 15 through 18. So Samuel lay down until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord. But Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. Then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. And he said, Here I am. He said, What is the word that he spoke to you? Please, do not hide it from me. May God do so to you, and more also, if you hide anything from me of all the words that he spoke to you. Oh, Eli, if Eli knew what was coming, he wouldn't have said that. So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. And he said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." Doesn't seem like a noble answer? It's kind of like Job when Job was getting afflicted by the devil. Oh, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. And he refused to curse the Lord. Now, there's a difference between, quote unquote, challenging the Lord versus cursing him. Cursing is playing with fire. So he said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." Like in a court of law, sometimes people throw themselves at the mercy of the court. It's like, he's the Lord, let him do. Let me read a little bit of what the Lord told Samuel the night before. I think the prophecy to the other prophet, was a little bit longer. So in 1 Samuel 3, starting verse 11, the Lord said to Samuel, "Behold, I'm about to do a thing in Israel at which both ears of everyone who hears it will tingle." Kind of causing a chill to go up and down your spine. "In that day, I will carry out against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house, from beginning to end. For I have told him that I am about to judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, because his sons brought a curse on themselves and he did not rebuke them. Therefore I have sworn to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or by offering forever, when God renders a judgment." So after hearing this, and knowing the word of the Lord had been confirmed by two prophets, Eli said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." Challenging the Lord means not saying, "It is the Lord, let him do what seems good unto him." And I'll not just present one, but I'll present two precedents for that. Going all the way back to Genesis 18, Abraham was called a friend of God. In Genesis 18, the Lord and two angels showed up, and they even spoke about, or the Lord spoke and told both of them that by this time next year I'll visit you and you will have the promised son. Sarah laughed, she didn't believe, and the Lord said, "You will see by the appointed time." But in Genesis 15, and I'll read from verses 16, or Genesis 18, I'll read from verses 16 through 33. "Then the men rose up from there and looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send him off. The Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. For I have chosen him, so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him." So it's like, should I share this thing with Abraham? And the Lord said, "The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know." Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. Abraham came near and said, do you think Abraham said, "You are the Lord? Do what seems right unto you"? In Jeremiah 27, the Lord, through the prophet Jeremiah, spoke that if they be prophets, let them now make intercession. If they be prophets, let them now make intercession to the Lord of hosts about bringing back the items sooner than he had planned. If they be prophets, let them now make intercession. Prophets and intercession should go hand in hand. Intercession is not always pretty. Have a message that may have just premiered. Today is Christmas Eve while I'm recording this. With Habakkuk. In Habakkuk chapter 1, he was crying out for justice, asking the Lord, how long will you not judge? So what did Abraham say? So Abraham came near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Abraham was challenging God. But there are times when the Lord does things and he wants us to intercede. The Lord spoke to Ezekiel that he sought a man to stand in the gap, but he found no one, which was why he was going to destroy the people. So again, Abraham, quote unquote, challenged God. Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you indeed sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous who are in it? I probably had like 2 recent conversations this week about how the Lord hasn't brought down judgment upon some places. And actually he has. But I'm talking about judgment like destruction. Because people are standing in the gap. Well, however, when you look in Jeremiah 7, Jeremiah 11, Jeremiah 14, there were 3 times the Lord told the prophet, don't bother praying for these people, because judgment was coming. So the Lord, he may do that. But if he doesn't, far be it from you to do such a thing. He continued, far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. He was challenging God. Far be it from you. Shall you, the judge of all the earth, hold up, shall not the judge, meaning the Lord, of all the earth, deal justly? He was challenging the Lord. Not challenging like Satan, or speaks about in Isaiah 14, where Lucifer, the son of the morning star, looking at the Lord's throne and wanted to elevate himself to be like the Most High. Not like that. So again, in this challenge to the Lord, shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? So to reword it, it's like, Lord, if you destroy the city, that's not just. What if there are righteous people in there? What if there are 50? So the Lord said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I'll spare the whole place on their account. So see, the intercessor, Abraham, also the way I spoke earlier, being a friend of God, the conversation may be a little bit different, even though it's still going to be respectful. Also, how would you react if a friend challenges you on something, as opposed to some stranger or even an enemy? It'd be different. Your friend would have more leeway. So again, the Lord said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I'll spare the whole place on their account. And not only their account, but Abraham's account. And Abraham replied, now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord, although I am but dust and ashes. So we see humility in Abraham's challenge, quote unquote challenge to the Lord. He knows he's but a flea to the Lord. He knows the Lord doesn't have to entertain any words he's saying. But he kept on challenging the Lord. In this case, challenging him to have mercy. Suppose the 50 righteous are lacking 5. Will you destroy the whole city because of 5? And he said, I'll not destroy it if I find 45 there. So we see the challenge is potentially giving the people of Sodom and Gomorrah a reprieve, or Sodom in this case. He spoke to him yet again and said, so continuing the challenge, Suppose 40 are found there. And he said, I'll not do it on account of 40. So see this intercessory challenge, or confronting God. Then he said, Oh, may the Lord not be angry. So even in challenging, with reverence, I shall speak. Suppose 30 are found there. And he said, I'll not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, Now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord. So yes, confronting the Lord or challenging him, it's dangerous business, but it's business suited for an intercessor. And by the way, part of the reason why I use the term prophetic intercessor, there are many people who pray to the Lord. When I use the term prophetic intercessor, it's not only about those who will pray to the Lord, but those who will actually hear back from him. In the book of Acts, when Rhoda and the intercessors were praying for Peter who was in prison, when the angel of the Lord went to go free him and Peter showed up and knocked at the door, Rhoda went back in to tell the people that Peter was at the gate. And they're like, oh, it's probably his angel. And it's kind of like, you're praying for something, you should be expecting an answer. And the answer was at the door, and they kept Peter outside until they finally let him in and realized it was Peter. So there are many people who are praying, but the Lord also needs people who will not only pray, not only those who will say, but those who will hear what the Spirit of the Lord is communicating in return. So Eli, rather than just saying he's the Lord, let him do, how about if he had assumed a posture of repentance? In Jonah 3, the Ninevites, they didn't just say, well, we know Jonah's a man of God and what he just said was from God, so let God do what he's going to do. They humbled themselves. In 1 Kings 21, when Elijah pronounced judgment upon the house of Ahab, Ahab humbled himself before the Lord, and the Lord recognized it and had a little bit of mercy on him. But then came 1 Kings 22, where Ahab was wiped off the face of the earth. So again, in verse 31, and he said, Now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. And he said, I'll not destroy it on the account of 20. And part of confronting the Lord and challenging him is pushing, and by the Spirit of God discerning how much to push and when to stop pushing. Because in what most people say is that don't press or push your luck in secular terms. But we see him, in a sense, pleading with the Lord, and the Lord is lowering the number, increasing the chances that Sodom would survive what the Lord is thinking about doing. And he said, Oh, may the Lord not be angry. So again, doing this respectfully, but still confronting and or challenging the Lord. And I shall speak only this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he said, I'll not destroy it on account of the 10. As soon as he had finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his place. So it doesn't seem as if Abraham had a chance to say, what if there are 5? Now, you know, Sodom and Gomorrah, as we've seen in Genesis 19, was leveled. 2 angels of the Lord went into the city to get Lot and his family. And those men gathered around the city trying to sexually assault those angels. So sometimes intercession will work, but then even the people you intercede for, they will do something to muck it up. They will mess it up. And even after men were struck with blindness, they were not deterred from trying to assault those angels in human form. You have to be careful about entertaining strangers, because many have entertained angels unawares. But Abraham interceded. Unfortunately, especially when we read 2 Peter 2, it speaks about in Sodom there was righteous Lot. He was a preacher of righteousness. So Lot was in a city. He was grieved by the things in the city, and he was righteous. So that's one person. Lot was married, so his wife could come along with him. He had 2 daughters. They could come along with him, making 4 persons. And then Lot actually had 2 sons-in-law, but they thought it was a joke. They didn't take Lot seriously, so they stayed when Lot took his family out of the city. And the angels even told him to hurry up because they were waiting for him to depart before calling down fire from heaven. So it wasn't even 10 who made it out, less than 10. So the Lord in his grace made a way for all righteous individuals to leave. And most of all, it was Lot. Because Lot's wife, she disobeyed the angels of the Lord and looked back and was turned into a pillar of salt, which left Lot and his 2 daughters. But at the end of Genesis 19, Lot's 2 daughters, the older one got the idea, as if Lot was the last man on earth, and to get him drunk and to sleep with him, to conceive a child. And inspired his second or the younger daughter to do the same thing. So both his daughters slept with Lot and reproduced. Sometimes intercession. Oh boy. It's like it backfires. But the Lord is a redeemer. The Lord is a redeemer. It is also tied to the story of Ruth and Boaz. Ruth was from Moab. Moab was one of the sons Lot ended up unknowingly procreating with one of his daughters. Lot and Abraham had parted ways. So the marriage of Ruth and Boaz was in a sense like bringing Lot's side of the family back into the fold. The Lord is merciful. Or as I like to say sometimes, the Lord is merciful until he is not. Because there comes a point where the Lord says enough. And as I mentioned earlier, Jeremiah 7:11-14, examples when the Lord told the prophet, do not bother interceding for these people. All the idolatry, making sacrifices to other gods, it was going to come under his judgment. And another example. Another example of confronting God. Rather than just simply saying, well, he's God and he's righteous. Let him do what he wants to do. The Lord may want your input. He may want your intercession, your fervent intercession, your confrontational intercession. Like Abraham saying, will the judge of all earth not do what is just? Wow, talking to God that way. But again, Abraham was a friend of God. Another friend of God was Moses, someone who spoke to the Lord face to face as a man does his friend. And for this, one of Moses' many examples of intercession is in Exodus 32, and I'll read from verses 1-14. Now, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled about Aaron and said to him, come, make us a god. Make us a god who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. You know what? Even if Moses had died, this is Exodus 32. In what we call Exodus 20, or the 10 Commandments, when the Lord said about not having any other gods before him, not making any graven images. And these people were talking about doing that, which the Lord had already commanded them. They knew better. Aaron said to them, tear off the gold rings. The high priest said this. Tear off the gold rings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me. Then all the people tore off the gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. I pause for a second. In Numbers 12, Aaron and Miriam were speaking about Moses. Basically that he wasn't the only prophet. There were prophets also. The Lord spoke to them. But then the Lord had them meet at the tabernacle or the tent of meeting. And he rebuked them. And he let them know that he doesn't speak to Moses like he does other prophets about how they speak face to face. And he also said that Moses was faithful in all his house. He was faithful in all his house. So here we have Aaron coming to agree with the people to make a graven image. He took this from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made it into a molten calf. And they said, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." Do you think those words were music to the Lord's ears? Do you think the Lord was so busy that he didn't hear those words from among his people? The ones he just rescued out of Egypt, delivered them by his mighty hand, showed them his awesome might. Now, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. No one can serve two gods." So the next day they rose early and offered burnt offerings and the next morning. So the next day they rose early and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play. It's funny, huh? Then the Lord spoke to Moses. He was on Mount Sinai. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go down at once, for your people, whom you brought up from the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves." Why is the Lord calling them Moses' people? It's like he's cut them off already. "They have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them. They have made for themselves a molten calf and have worshipped it and have sacrificed to it and said, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt.'" Okay, that's the kind of thing you don't want to do to the Lord, because that's like slapping the Lord across his face. Where he delivered... I was going to do a separate message, but I'm not sure if I will. But do not return to what the Lord brought you out of. Unless it is something like how they were going to kill Moses in Egypt, and he fled. And then 40 years later, the Lord told him to go to Egypt, tell the Pharaoh, "Let my children go." It's like, unless the Lord sends you back, don't go back to what he delivered you from. This is a way you don't want to confront God. So again, the Lord said about the people, they said, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." The Lord said to Moses, "I have seen this people, and behold, they are an obstinate people. Now then, let me alone, that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them, and I will make of you a great nation." So the Lord wanted to destroy them. Did Moses say, "Well, you're the Lord, do as you will"? Especially upon hearing this part, "And I'll make of you a great nation." So the Lord would have killed all the Israelites, except for Moses, and potentially Joshua, because he was waiting the base in the moment as opposed to being in the camp. Imagine the glory Moses could have gotten, more so than he gets now, for the things that he did for the Lord back then. But the Lord could have raised up the children of Israel through him, which would have meant the Messiah would have come through the tribe of Levi. Would the Lord have been right for destroying the children of Israel based on the things he had done for them? And how in a sense like they slapped him in his face by building a golden calf and said, this is your God who brought you out of Egypt? Would he have been right? Would he have been just to do that? Could Moses simply said, you're God, do as you will? Nope. Moses respectfully confronted God, and this was how he did it, as an intercessor. Again, an oftentimes overlooked aspect of prophetic ministry. Then Moses entreated the Lord his God and said, O Lord, why does your anger burn against your people whom you have brought up from the land of... Even this stuff, initially Lord saying, your people as in Moses' people. And it's like Moses is like, I'm leading them, but I'm leading your people. So, O Lord, why does your anger burn against your people whom you have brought out from the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians speak, saying, oh boy, why should the Egyptians speak, saying, with evil intent, he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to destroy them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and change your mind about doing harm to your people. Part of why I smiled a while ago. And let's just start off by giving an example of someone saying, Lord, if this is too difficult for you, don't bother. I won't tell anyone. This is just be our secret, that you can do what you said you're going to do. There's also this. Sometimes a person may confront God, may quote unquote challenge God by saying, God, if you don't do what you say you're going to do, I'm going to tell everybody that you're a liar, that you said this and you didn't do it. Who would dare say that to the Lord? Better be a friend. But there's some intercessors who will challenge God like that. And here's something many people may find unfathomable. God may actually love it. Why? Because they're being truthful with him. They're not trying to sugarcoat stuff. They're not trying to act one way while feeling another, knowing the Lord knows what is in their heart. He knows their thoughts when they're far off. The Lord values their integrity. Even with Job's affliction, where his wife is said to him, are you still maintaining integrity? Curse God and die. So they have that kind of frankness with the Lord, where they're being truthful. In a recent message, I was inspired to say that Jesus said things that were unkind, but they were not untrue. Telling people they would die in their sins was unkind, but not untrue. There are things the Lord said, they were unkind, but they were not untrue. So when a person, a friend of God, an intercessor, is being honest with him, even though it may start bordering on like blasphemy, but it's like it's maybe getting close. There are things two friends will do that someone who's just an associate, you can't do that. So again, in Moses challenged the Lord, confronting the Lord, and the Lord would have been totally justified in destroying all of the Israelites. Despite the things he had done, he told them to not have any other gods before him. So he'd been totally justified in wiping them off the face of the earth. In a sense, starting afresh with Moses, who at the time was more than 80 years old. So again, back to verse 11. Then Moses entreated the Lord, challenged the Lord, beseeched the Lord, confronted the Lord, his God, and said, O Lord, why does your anger burn against your people, whom you have brought out from the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? As I was reading that, I had a vision like of a cartoon where someone gets blown up with dynamite. But of course, in real life, if someone were to get blown up with something like that, body parts would go over the place. But in a cartoon, the person's hair may kind of frizz out and the person's covered with black smoke. It's like that, that's what I saw. If you don't have a relationship with the Lord to challenge him in such a way, tread even more lightly than others. Because you may do something that someone else does, and because that person's relationship with the Lord allows him or her to get away with it. But you try it, and you may get smacked in such a way that you may never do it again. So a lot of this stuff is relationally based. And you may even look at it and say, but my prayers are, or so-and-so's prayers are no different from mine. Not necessarily. In Numbers 12, the aforementioned Numbers 12, when the Lord went up from the tent of meeting, he struck Miriam with leprosy. But rather than Aaron interceding to the Lord, he humbly asked Moses to intercede to the Lord on his behalf. He learned his lesson that Moses' relationship with the Lord is different. So some people can say things to the Lord and get away with it that others cannot. And Moses did intercede to the Lord. But the Lord said Miriam was going to stay in her condition for 7 days. And in fact, let me go there, because what the Lord said, it was unkind, but it wasn't untrue. And this is a side of God that many people do not know. In Numbers 12, starting verse 13, Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, O God, heal her, I pray. But the Lord said to Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, would she not bear her shame for 7 days? Let her be shut up for 7 days outside the camp, and afterward she may be received again. Unkind, but not untrue. Unkind, but not unnecessary. God speaks the truth. He also expects you to speak the truth, especially to him. And then this part of Moses' intercession. Why should the Egyptians speak, saying, with evil intent he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to destroy them from the face of the earth? So even saying stuff people would say about him. Things people would say about God. Same the stuff I mentioned earlier. Saying to the Lord, Lord, if you don't do this, I'm going to tell everybody that you said you were going to do this and you didn't do it. Now, I'll say more than likely that's not going to happen. The Lord keeps his words. But also in saying that, sometimes people say God is going to do something and it didn't happen, and they'll still blame God. However, Scripture says, Deuteronomy 18 verses 20 through 22, where what a person says in the name of the Lord does not come to pass, it means God had not spoken. In Jeremiah 28, Jeremiah said, in Jeremiah 28, Jeremiah said, the prophet will be, paraphrasing, the prophet will be known that God has sent him when the word the prophet has spoken comes to pass. Also in Jeremiah 32 verses 6 through 8, Jeremiah received a vision about his cousin coming to sell him a field that belongs to his uncle. And when the cousin showed up and did those things, then Jeremiah the prophet said, then I knew it was the word of the Lord. So if you're going to get to a point and say, Lord, if you don't do this, I'm going to tell people that, then you better make sure it was actually the Lord who said it in the first place. Because some people have been lying on the Lord, saying, oh, the Lord said this is going to happen, or this is going to happen by a certain date. And when it didn't happen, they start making excuses. And that's one of the ways people become bona fide false prophets. Because they don't want to take accountability for their actions. So if you're going to call the Lord out on something, kind of like in Exodus or Genesis 20. In Genesis 17, the Lord told Abraham that he was going to bless him with a promised son, Isaac, by this time next year. Then the Lord followed up in Genesis 18 by telling Abraham, within earshot of Sarah, that he was going to give them the promised child by this time next year. So there was no doubt God had said it. So for example, in Genesis 20, when King Abimelech of Gerar had taken Sarah into his harem, see what is confronting God? Then the prayer could be, whether Abraham prayed or not, but the prayer could have been, Lord, you said that by this time next year, my wife Sarah and I are going to have a child. And now she's in some man's harem. I need you to watch over your words and to fulfill them. I need to keep the man away from my wife. I need to bring my wife to me so that your word will come to pass. When you said it, I laughed. When Sarah said it, or when you said it the first time to me, I laughed. When he stood in front of me, so Sarah could hear, she laughed. But now, laughing or playtime is over. You said it, so you must do it. I need my wife out of King Abimelech's harem. That could have been a type of prayer, and not necessarily in that kind of language, but with that kind of conviction, because you know God has said it. And because you know God has said it, then you have authority to pray in such a way by saying, God, I know you said it. You're not a man that you should lie. In a sense, confronting God, challenging God. And by challenging God, it's not about to unseat him, but to challenge him. And not that he has to rise up to the occasion, but to challenge him to do what he says he's going to do by the appointed time. Because Lord, if you're 1 second late, you have lied. And you're not a man that you should lie. So Moses said, with evil intent, or the Egyptians will say, with evil intent he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to destroy them from the face of the earth. Turn from your burning anger and change your mind about doing harm to your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants to whom you swore by yourself, and said to them, I'll multiply your descendants as the stars of the heavens, and all this land of which I have spoken I'll give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. And by the way, the Lord could have killed all the other Israelites, raised up the nation through Moses, and still kept his promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Israel. But Moses, standing in the gap, facing the fire, confronting the Lord, challenging him to keep his words. And what do you know? So the Lord changed his mind about the harm which he said he would do to his people. His anger was he was starting to kindle it. It hadn't been fully fired up yet. It wasn't too late. But Moses interceded. He confronted God. He challenged him as an intercessor. So again, there are times you may hear an intercessor speak to the Lord, or speak about how he or she addresses the Lord. And you may be like, man, I'd never do that. But the intercessor has a relationship with the Lord. And they'll confront the Lord in such a way, such as how Abraham confronted the Lord, saying, will the judge of the earth do unjustly? Now he realized he was a mere man, a mere mortal. And it's kind of like, who's he to tell God, will the judge of the earth do unjustly? Moses, telling him the Egyptians will say that basically you can do what you said you're going to do. You can deliver them, so you kill them. But by the way, Moses knew his limits, because Moses wanted to go into the promised land, but the Lord told him he was not going to do it. And he kept on pressing the Lord. But then there came a point where the Lord said, do not speak to me about this anymore. And Moses zipped it. That's part of being a friend with God. Know how far you can push, and knowing when to quit while you're ahead, before you end up dead. What's your relationship with the Lord like? Are you afraid to say certain things to him? Are you saying certain things to him with your lips, but in your heart there's something else? And you're doing these things as if he doesn't know what's really going on? Are you angry with the Lord? And not to say you should curse/cuss him out, but are you angry with the Lord? But then you're pretending as if everything is fine about your relationship. That's how some people end up getting divorced. There's an issue, it's not dealt with, or maybe it's brought up and the other person ignores, but there's an issue, it's not dealt with, and it's like a volcano. Things are brewing under the surface until one day there's an eruption. And kind of with plate tectonics, where some plates drift apart, some are rubbing together, so like plate tectonics. You and the person, you drift away and potentially drift away from each other permanently. Because I think I have another message to record. Oh yes, about a relationship with God. Well, whether you are an intercessor or not, I pray this message blesses you, to inspire you to draw closer to the Lord, to speak with him respectfully, but with integrity. He doesn't lie, and neither should you. Jesus the Christ is Lord.